The Taiwanese president, Li Teng-he, has recently given what they call the 10-10 speech, an October 10th speech, sort of an Independence Day speech in Taiwan. And predictably, China didn't like it. Anything that has to do with the word independence or anything that has to do with some version of something besides they need to come back to China, they're not going to like it. But this time was one of their bigger engagements where they had a total of 125 aircraft that took to the air in the airspace near Taiwan in their biggest really warning to date. And one wonders if this continual buildup of the capacity there, and this was also done with a lot of shifts in the sea, if this portends something different, some change, and should we be concerned about a potential war? Now, we have a great person to discuss this with today. One of my colleagues at Defense Priority, Director of Asia Engagement, Lyle Goldstein, Dr. Lyle Goldstein, also the Director of the China Initiative at Brown University. Lyle, welcome back to the show.
Oh, great to be here, Danny. Thanks for having me again.
Well, listen, let's just jump right in here because, anytime you have an issue between China and Taiwan, there's, so much of the global economy is tied up about things that happen in and around the Taiwan Straits and with China, Taiwan, et cetera, that it gets a lot of people's interest and notice. And the fact that the U.S. also has lots of ships in the area, we do lots of freedom of navigation operations, and there's just constant friction in there, lots of boisterous statements back and forth from China and the United States, et cetera. What do you make of this current situation?
Well, Danny, I see it, as part of a clear pattern that, China, I think, has been improving its armed forces for decades at a very rapid clip. And when China says they want to unify with Taiwan, I take them at their word. And I see a lot of indications, Danny, that they're, serious. Now, I don't think we can ever know, what day they're going to attack on, really. They will do their utmost to hide that from us, that they have every incentive to do so. And I think it's true. And many will speak up and say, hey, actually, China has no intention to conquer Taiwan. They'd rather buy Taiwan or something like that. Those are valid perspectives. And I think U.S. policy, we should be doing everything we can to incentivize the latter. That is, we should encourage, as it were, peaceful approaches to the cross-strait relationship, which is incredibly delicate. But Danny, I'm convinced that they are developing that military option, and that they may indeed could choose to exercise it even in the near term.
I want to play a little clip here that kind of encapsulates kind of what both sides, Taiwan and China, are saying about this incident. And then I've got some observations on the backside. Watch this.
This is a stern warning to Taiwan independence forces. It is a legitimate and necessary operation for safeguarding state sovereignty.
China regularly engages in military exercises around Taiwan, a de facto independent democracy, to intimidate the Taipei government, exercises that Taiwan views as a threat to regional peace.
The consensus of the international community is to maintain peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait and the region. China should respect the existence of the Republic of China, Taiwan, respect the people's choice of a free and democratic way of life, refrain from military provocations and threatening the peace and stability of the region.
Taiwan said it would not escalate in response to the exercises, but that it would raise its alert posture on its outlying islands. Defense Minister Joseph Wu said China's image would only suffer as a result.
Just 4 days ago on National Day, the president held out an olive branch in his keynote speech, which was welcomed by the international community. But China ignored the message and continued to threaten Taiwan with military actions. I think the world will be watching closely and will not accept China's actions.
Now, what he referred to there was the president's new speech, and that was the so-called 10-10 speech, where he gave a conversation about how he views the world. Most of it, according to this Council on Foreign Relations analysis, was based on domestic issues that had to do with domestic politics. But there was some issues on the cross-strait relations. And in that, at least according to Western views, it was a kind of a measured situation. It wasn't a poke and a stick in China's eye. But anytime you even use the word independent in any way associated with Taiwan, it's going to make China unhappy. How did China view that 10-10 speech?
Well, they view it rather negatively. I don't think it was a huge departure from what has been said in the past, but there were some parts of the speech that were going to offend China for sure. President Lyle repeatedly referred to our nation, our nation of Taiwan, essentially. And invoking Taiwan as a separate nation, as a nation separate from China, that is enough to make the Chinese see red. Talking about the island's sovereignty several times, vowing to defend the sovereignty of the island. He also said that the two sides are more or less equal, that they are not subordinate to one another. Of course, that's sure to set China off. So, there were many parts of the speech that the Chinese were going to react badly to. I would also mention quickly for your listeners, so that they understand the history here, if you don't mind, why is this called the 10-10 speech? That's very important, I think, for American listeners to reflect on. What was 10-10? October 10th, 1911. It has nothing to do with Taiwan, actually. This is an event that occurred in Wuhan, in the middle of China. And that was a rebellion that caused the fall of the Qing dynasty and resulted in the rise of the Republic, briefly, Republic of China. It is truly the start of this regime. But of course, it has nothing to do with Taiwan at all. And it's just critical to remember that, because those people who in Washington and so forth who want to argue that this indeed is a separate country, as Lai said in his discussion, need to know that there's just so many pieces that link Taiwan to the mainland that it's almost an inescapable conclusion that this is actually a civil war that continues to this day.
Yeah, we have actually, Ambassador Freeman's been on this show numerous times, always highlighting that fact that this is still an open, the Civil War that so-called ended in some people's view in the West in 1949, didn't end. It just kind of went into a hiatus, and emotionally, it's still very much an open issue. I want to look at why this is important to the United States, other than just maybe we don't like China, and there's certainly some in that category, but there's a lot of other bigger global issues, especially economic and tech issues. As Secretary Blinken said, actually the day after this 10-10 speech, watch this.
50% of commercial container traffic goes through the Taiwan Strait every day. More than 70% of the high-end semiconductors that the world needs are produced on Taiwan. So there's a strong interest around the world on maintaining peace and stability, preserving the status quo, avoiding any kind of conflict that could disrupt things that are so essential to the global economy.
Now, it's hard to argue with any of the words he just said there, because it certainly is in America's economic interest and national security interest to keep the status quo, to keep the strait open, to keep all that as it has been, because of the impact that it would have if that was ever shut off with the technology sector. But then you look at some of our actions and they don't quite line up with it. And one wonders, and I wonder if you could kind of speak on this a little bit, this whole issue of the freedom of navigation operations that the U.S. does perpetually in the Taiwan Straits. That implies that because of this issue that Blinken just mentioned there about all the tech stuff that's going through, that we need to keep it open, and that if we're not, then China might want to shut that off. But that seems counterintuitive, because China, it seems like, has more interest in keeping that open than anybody. How do you view that situation?
Well, you're surely correct. And all these statistics are skewed by the fact that China is a huge producer of everything. for the whole world economy. So when one talks about the South China Sea or the Taiwan Strait, it's absolutely true that many of the largest ports in the world are in China and are proximate to those areas. So, yes, we should avoid a conflict if we possibly can, and hope that trade keeps flowing. No doubt any kind of conflict, would be a major disruption. What disturbs me, Danny, though, about these comments, which I hear all the time now, is kind of a building. It seems like the hawks are building up to an argument where they contend that the United States must intervene in a Taiwan conflict precisely to prevent the disruption to the world economy. I don't think that argument holds water. And I think we had better be very leery of that kind of reasoning.
And why do you say it doesn't hold water? What part do you disagree with?
Well, I mean, let's put it this way. If the war is just between the mainland and Taiwan, probably it will be a rather short war. And the economic effects, I think, would be, if not small, they would not be terribly large, I don't think. And they would be of short duration, 6 months to a year. However, if the United States intervenes and we have a clash between superpowers that could, as you well know, could even escalate to the nuclear level, we're talking about a whole new level of destruction across the world, and especially to the global economy, which would be, extremely severe. So, the case, there are people making this case that Taiwan's role in chip fabrication is so critical that the world economy could never withstand the blow. I don't see it that way. I think there's from what I understand, there's significant flexibility in that market space. It's true Taiwan does have somewhat of a niche. It would, cause some
Near-term disruption.
Near-term disruption, but part of it is, I think, as I understand it, TSMC is expert at building the, most high-end chips, but those high-end chips are not critical in most products. The low-end chips, which are made around the world, including in China, but other places too, are quite adequate for almost all of our needs. So I don't really accept the idea that Taiwan's a problem with Taiwan is going to send the world economy into a spiral.
So what about the freedom of navigation aspect of this?
Sorry.
If the U.S. isn't doing these FON, as they're called, operations, is there a risk to global shipping? Meaning, what happens if we don't do these?
No, there really isn't. This issue has been, hyped and overhyped beyond belief. Honestly, Danny, this issue more comes up with the South China Sea than the Taiwan Strait. It is a little bit of an issue in the Taiwan Strait because occasionally, there will be a flare-up when the United States sends ships through the straits. But by and large, China does not contest our right to send ships through international waters. That's an international seaway. It's not, I'm not aware of any real formal protests that they've made in a legal sense on that. Now, they will protest other kind of encroachments, and those are the ones in the South China Sea that come close to their, those reef bases that they've set up. So that's kind of a different matter. But to my estimate, again, it's a lot of threat inflation where people are suggesting that China has some kind of interest in, inhibiting global trade in some way. And that's just completely, nothing could be further from the truth. China is more dependent on trade than most other countries. They want this trade to flow. And we really have almost zero evidence of China halting commercial traffic. The only traffic that they're halting very specifically concerns either, number one, fishing, which is a concern for all the states around the South China Sea, and fishing, and the other one is kind of seabed exploitation of oil and gas resources on the sea bottom.
And that's an issue. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's an issue between the various states in the South China Sea area, not something that the United States has any need to be involved with, because they're going to have to resolve this one way or the other themselves.
No, exactly. I mean, the U.S. really has no bone in that fight. We're just we're indifferent, and we should be indifferent. And this is the kind of scrapping that goes on between neighbors. Indeed, even you find the Philippines and Vietnam also have disagreement about where the line should be drawn and who should be allowed to do exploratory drilling here and there. Actually, the status quo, which China seems to be more or less comfortable with, is one in which the oil and gas seems to stay under the sea bottom. In other words, nobody is doing that much exploratory drilling, because I think all states are kind of waiting for that all to be resolved. But I've also heard Chinese strategists say candidly, it's just not, the game is not worth the candle. In other words, the amount of oil and gas under there is just not worth
the resources it would take to get it out.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So it plays into this kind of threat inflation. That is, people want to act like this oil and gas is absolutely critical. In fact,
right.
it's marginal. This is
I wanna
mostly
go
a
back
contest. Sorry, it's mostly a contest about national pride. That really is the
and that's
primary driver.
more wars have been fought over that than actual resources, probably, if you put them all together.
Sure.
I want to go back to what Blinken was saying in his 11 October speech, because he touched on another thing there about what's important to America in there. And this is another one of those times when his words, I think, are right. And you're going to hear an odd, almost agreement from the Chinese side here in just a second. But first, here's what Blinken said.
On Taiwan, almost across the board, the strong desire for all of the ASEAN countries, and this extends well beyond ASEAN, to see that peace and stability is maintained across the Taiwan Strait. And I can tell you that with regard to the so-called 10-10 speech, which is a regular exercise, China should not use it in any fashion as a pretext for provocative actions. On the contrary, we want to reinforce, and many other countries want to reinforce, the imperative of preserving the status quo, and neither party taking any actions that might undermine it.
And I'm going to play a clip here from that includes a Chinese speaker from the communist side that's going to sound almost in agreement with this. Watch this one.
A show of the overwhelming force China could put into action against Taiwan. Air, land, and sea power, enough to completely encircle the island. These military drills come days after a speech by Taiwanese President Lei Ching-te, marking Taiwanese Independence Day. He was openly defiant, dismissing unification with China. Beijing says the exercises are in response to that speech, and a warning to so-called separatists. Taiwan must choose peace or self-rule, but not both.
The provocations from pro-independence forces will inevitably face countermeasures. China has always been committed to maintaining peace and stability in the region. If you are concerned about peace in the Strait, you should oppose Taiwan independence.
So they're actually saying, we actually want the status quo to go to. They'd like eventual reunification, but as long as the status quo seems to be maintained, they seem to be okay with that. So then the question comes in, who's wanting to change the status quo? Because it doesn't seem to be the Chinese, and the U.S. says we don't want to change the status quo, but yet you see this ongoing military confrontation, and at least in posturing, keeps going up. So what's the rub?
Well, I think what you have here, Danny, is it's not particular to this situation, but you have a situation where both sides, have different interpretations of the status quo, and Beijing's interpretation is that there had been a consensus, more or less, dating from the Nixon-Kissinger compromise in the Shanghai communique from 1972, that there was more or less a consensus, even accepted to some degree, even in Taipei and on Taiwan, that that all Chinese, as it says in the Shanghai Communique, that all Chinese on both sides of the strait recognize there's one China. So that, that formula, as perceived by Beijing, has been a fairly solid foundation. Now, as you know, and others, Washington really no longer sees it that way, and neither does Taipei. I mean, we can talk about all the complicating figures, but to my estimate, Washington has kind of walked a good distance away from that policy, and that's a shame, because I do think that strict adherence, preservation of the one China policy would take a lot of the bitterness out of this dispute, and I agree that China could live with circumstances where it didn't have a kind of day-to-day control over Taiwan, but it at least could pro forma. And let's face it, in China we all know that appearances matter, and just I do believe that Beijing would be quite satisfied with just sort of the appearance of sovereignty, without having to exercise day-to-day control over the island. But the insistence, and for various reasons, even beyond the Washington's control, this has become much more acute. We can talk about why that's the case, but
I kind of want to go down that path a little bit, because it's not in the current news cycle. Most Americans have already forgotten about it, but I wonder how much China hasn't, like when Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi made a big comment there, or a visit there. We've had a lot of other high-level delegations that have gone over the time. I think Johnson has had some engagement at one point or another. So does China see those kinds of actions as chipping away at the status quo? And how important is that to the United States?
Yeah, the high-level visits have become, have reached a kind of fever pitch. If you tally up all the representatives and senators who now parade to the island on an, if not a daily basis, probably a monthly basis, it's become kind of a rite of passage for people, I think, who aspire in the foreign policy and defense realm. They have to show they're sort of tough on China. So that really, I think the leaders in Taipei are welcoming, senior U.S. officials, including even cabinet level officials. And then there's the parade of retired admirals and generals, as highly paid consultants, so forth, and frankly as lobbyists, and this goes on as well. And but there are other things too, a number of other things. I mean, we invested, I believe, about $250 million into our facility there. When I say our facility, it's not formally an embassy. Well, what is it? Well, we call it, the name for it officially is an institute. And that may strike you as pretty peculiar, but if it quacks like a duck, it's probably an embassy. And at $250 million, I'd say it's quite a nice embassy too.
Well, so let me ask you this, Lyle. What is America? I see what the risk is, and how all these meetings you're talking about, how that raises the ire of the Chinese side and helps fuel some of these military exercises we're seeing. What do we gain for that? What is the benefit to the United States to engage in these kinds of issues that the Chinese sees as provocative?
Well, I see very little gain. I see, on the other hand, a whole lot of risk, Danny. We're playing with fire. This is a rising superpower, a superpower now that has a major chip on its shoulder. That there's enormous complexity to this problem. We haven't even broached the Japan issue, but all of Japan's atrocities in China are frequently kind of meld together into this Taiwan issue and work as a kind of to exaggerate the anger, because Japan occupied Taiwan during that same period. So what I'm saying is Taiwan kind of becomes this icon of Chinese nationalism, and so we're becoming, we're putting all our eggs in this basket, seemingly thinking that we can pull off, I guess, what is some kind of bluff. But I think it's sadly mistaken. I mean, why do Americans do this constantly? I mean, I guess it's a flavor of virtue signaling, which has become ever more common in the social media age, but a certain need to show not only virtue, but toughness, and so forth. And so, China seems to be a very fashionable bad guy right after Russia. So, this has become ever more popular, not just on the Hill, but just among Americans generally. But this is an incredibly dangerous game to play.
Right. And in fact, I want to go down that path because obviously the nature of the topic of our show here today is the 125 planes that were involved in a lot of ships, et cetera. But there are other things that are going on too. You mentioned Russia. Obviously, some of these provocative, the actions that China views as provocative for us, all the things you just mentioned there makes them unhappy. Well, we're also doing, of course, on the Russian side with Taiwan. I'm sorry, with Ukraine, and giving them all the weapons and all the things have been going on there for now closed in on 3 years, et cetera. The net result of those two pressures by the U.S. and the West is pushing China and Russia closer together. And I think this is actually earlier today. The Chinese Russian defense minister met with his Chinese counterpart again. So they continue to expand in cooperation. There's been a lot of reports out of late that despite Chinese claims to the contrary, they've actually been helping Russia in a number of key important aspects of their war against the Ukraine over there. And now then you saw last month, there was a 400 ship joint naval exercise, the Sea of Japan, which was unprecedented since the end of the USSR. So it was quite large then, and I think I saw that there's another one coming up here soon. There's been lots of activity around the Aleutian Islands between some aerial patrols and some other naval ships that have a lot of people in Washington upset. Should we be alarmed at this increasing cooperation between China and Russia?
Yeah, I think we should be. There's, to me, this alignment between Russia and China. Well, I'm a person who thinks that these countries, quite naturally align. That is, there's a variety of reasons why these countries make a good fit. From an economic point of view, there is, a strong synergy. I mean, Russia has immense resources and China has immense manufacturing capability. So right there, you have really enough to make some very strong glue here. But we have kind of cemented this relationship with our actions. Now, 10 years ago, or maybe 15, looking at Russia's disposition and Vladimir Putin in particular, he, I think, was much more desiring of solidifying relationships in the West, right? We know he lived in Germany for a long time and speaks German and had that inclination. He also, I think, has quite an interest in Japan. So I don't think this was kind of a natural go-to for Vladimir Putin, but it has become one of his signature policies to develop this very, very strong friendship with China. So it didn't have to be this way, but it has become this way, I think, in part because of our foolish overreach.
And certainly this BRICS summit that's coming up now, and just barely a week from now, both China and Russia are putting a lot of stock in moving the center of gravity of the global economic realm away from the G7 in the West towards a synergy around those two. So that's also not helping. But one of the things I wanted to talk about in the last bit of time we have here that you had mentioned in the past also is that this shipbuilding issue. Now, before I ask you about the Chinese shipbuilding capacity, I want to contrast it with the U.S. side, because many people are saying the U.S. should have a 350 ship Navy and we need to get bigger, et cetera. But less noticed is the fact that we just mothballed 17 naval vessels, not because there was anything wrong with them, but because we didn't have enough sailors to man them. So we have, I think, a dual problem, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this. Our naval shipbuilding capacity itself is comparatively small, and then that's bounced off by the Chinese side, and take it from there.
Yeah, Danny, I worked for the Navy for 20 years, so I'm pretty well versed on a lot of the difficulties that our Navy is having. Actually, there were problems with those ships. It wasn't just an issue of manning. It was um, we've now had two surface ship programs that have basically gone completely bust. The littoral combat ship, which is supposed to be our light frigate, and as you probably know, frigates are kind of the workhorse of any Navy. So we have a really pretty major problem in the Navy, and we just got to get our act together. Now, I'm somebody who thinks I think we can pull out of this, and there are some, it's not all gloom and doom. Our submarine force remains very strong. So I think our Navy does have sufficient firepower for what we need to do. But here's the rub, Danny. While our shipyards have been generally been in decline, China has ascended to the top rank of shipbuilding powers around the world. And this is not my calculation. This was CSIS, which I guess is the leading think tank in Washington, although I often disagree with them. But they assess that China now has 230 times the shipbuilding capacity of the United States. Not 23 times, 230 times. And just, reflect on that for a moment, folks. And by the way, I've walked many shipyards in China, and I can tell, it's often said, I think it's correctly, that China has more shipbuilding capacity just in the one city of Shanghai. Never mind, Dalian, Qingdao, Guangzhou, all those huge shipbuilding centers, but just in Shanghai, more shipbuilding capacity than the entire United States. So what does that mean? If we're get into a naval scrap with China, I say scrap, I mean a series of battles where we could lose dozens of ships, it means they can reconstitute and repair their fleet much faster than we can, and not putting aside the fact that they have the huge advantage of proximity. So they not only do they have proximity, and I would argue national will, since their core interests are at stake, so they're winning on those fronts. But here, just industrial capacity, it's not even close, Danny. So this is a fight we should avoid. We should kind of rein in our objectives a little bit, and pursue realism and restraint with China. Look, we need not fear China. If it comes to a battle in the middle of the Pacific, I'm convinced we would win that battle. But China, if you look closely, they care a lot about Taiwan, but there's no evidence of territorial ambitions that go beyond that. So I think that's we have to look closely at that, understand the history, the culture, the reasons why Taiwan is an obsession. But I don't see any evidence that China is going to become, Imperial Japan or Nazi Germany or anything like that.
I almost find it comical if it wasn't so serious in its implications. When people suggest that if China gets Taiwan, then they're going to be able to go and project power all this other place. And I'm like, why do you think Taiwan is stopping them now? If they wanted to do that, if they had the capacity, they could do it right now. Taiwan's not going to stop them from doing anything. So they don't think about the ramifications and the practical applications of how that power would go. But I think the reason is very simple. China doesn't have the interest in doing that. They wanted to protect their goals, their coastlines. They want to protect their ability to have influence in their region, and they don't want the United States in their backyard, hence the A2AD defensive strategy that they have. And my view, and tell me if you agree or disagree, is that if we don't go and starting a conflict with China, they have no interest and motivation to start one with us.
That's exactly right. And, to this day, their ability for sort of power projection, I said that if it came to a war in mid-Pacific, at Midway or around Hawaii, of course, I think all military analysts would say that we would win probably quite easily. So China does not want to become this, heavyweight, throwing its weight around the world, fighting wars in the Middle East, sending fleets to the Atlantic, to the Caribbean. I do see some evidence that, China has actually prepared to deploy its fleet to the Atlantic, basically for one reason. that is to, basically serve up to Uncle Sam some of its own medicine, with the logic that, if you're going to come and push China's buttons in the South China Sea, then they're going to, they have to retaliate. So are we going to push them to take this approach? I think we should refrain, and if we exercise some restraint, then China will also exercise restraint. I'm sure of that.
Yeah, we don't seem to be very good at that. And of course, that if that ever happened, no one's going to say, "Oh, you know what? This is just us getting ours in return. All right, let's just back off of that, and everything will be fine." No, they'll say, "See, I told you these guys are expansionists, and now, my God, we have to get even bigger." That's what's going to happen. So we'll see where they end up going with that.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you just one last question here. There's lots of computer simulations have been done, lots of war games have been conducted, and almost all of them, in fact, actually all of them that I'm aware of, I don't know that it's even almost, shows that the U.S. suffering egregious losses if we fight China over Taiwan or anything in the South China Sea, as you point out, in their backyard, as opposed to in the middle of the Pacific where they don't have the capacity to wage war. So it would seem rational to not want to get involved with any kind of a conflict in the front door. Yet there are so many people so eager to seem like to say, yes, we should get rid of the strategic ambiguity and we should defend Taiwan if they get attacked. Why do you suppose that there is this eagerness to do something that all the evidence shows we could not successfully do?
Well, I think part of the reason is, of course, that China does appear quite ominous, from Taiwan's perspective. So, I think many Americans just, they sympathize with the little guy, and they want to, they have this kind of reflex of, we can somehow save them. Unfortunately, that is just, completely foolish, ahistorical, and acultural kind of thinking, and really, we need to think with our heads, not with our hearts. Danny, I like to use you're a former green suiter, so I could say with affection, I used to give tours of the Gettysburg battlefield, and Gettysburg, as you know, the first general who arrived at the scene declared this was good ground to fight Bobby Lee. The North could actually defeat the vaunted, Southern Army here because the geography was favorable. And that did allow the North to carry the day. But in this case, the terrain, the geography is completely unfavorable to the United States,
Right.
and we are likely to lose this fight if it comes to that. So on the other hand, it's completely favorable from China's perspective.
Right.
So if the PLA seems like it's salivating over a fight, I think they might indeed be salivating because they can win this scenario because of the favorable geography and all that entails.
Well, let's hope that we don't put that to the test because that would be really bad for the United States. We have all the power we need to keep our
pray that it
interests
doesn't
safe
come
throughout
to pass.
the Western Pacific as well. Well, listen, thank you very much for coming on today, Lyle. Always appreciate having you on and give us such clarity on these issues that have a lot to do with American national security.
Pleasure to talk with you, Danny.
And thank you guys for joining us as well. We really appreciate you coming on. Be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't. And listen, we got some great shows coming up for you the rest of the week. We have Doug McGregor back. We have Larry Johnson back. We have Suleiman on tomorrow. If you have been in some of our X Spaces that we're a part of, or some of Mario Naval, he's like a key figure in that. It's really entertaining, and we're going to have him on the show for the first time tomorrow. Be sure and watch out for that. In the meantime, we will see you next time on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.